After publishing the critique, Kant continued to live his life of rigid routine. This did not preclude an element of socializing, though this was always very much a minor element in his life. He maintained relations with a number of his brighter students, as well as a few members of the faculty, yet he was never close with any of them. No one was addressed with the informal "du," even after decades of social contact. Thought was his life. For a scholar, thinking is a means of nourishment, without which, when he is awake or alone, he cannot live. He was more intent on knowing himself than anyone else. But the task of getting to know Kant proved as difficult for himself as it was for others. "I do not understand myself sufficiently," he complained. Perhaps he was afraid of what he might find. Here Schafstein makes a fundamental point. This thing in itself was not simply unknown, it was forbidden. For it was Kant's suppressed emotional life, I take it, and he was afraid that if it was revealed, he would be devastated. Kant was well aware that he had no friends, but this didn't bother him. He was fond of quoting Aristotle's remark, "My friends, I have no friends." Indeed, he positively recommended this state. Friendship is a restriction of favourable sentiments to a single subject, and is very pleasant to him towards whom they are directed, but also a proof that generality and goodwill are lacking. Psychologists have claimed that Kant's inability or unwillingness to form close relationships indicated a profound unhappiness. But Kant does not appear to have been unhappy. Quite the opposite. Those who met him remarked on his cheerfulness. Kant's disposition was by nature meant for cheerfulness. He saw the world with a glad look, and transferred his cheerfulness to external things. Therefore he was usually disposed to be happy, was a typical observation by one of his colleagues. 7 years after the publication of his Critique of Pure Reason, Kant published his Critique of Practical Reason. Shorter than its predecessor, it makes no other concessions to the reader. When I came across the first edition owned by Coleridge, an ardent fan of Kant, I couldn't help noticing that some of the pages were still uncut. In this work, Kant reinstated God, who was no longer deemed unspeakable because he didn't fit into the categories. The Critique of Practical Reason is devoted to the ethical part of Kant's system. Here, instead of seeking metaphysical grounds for our perception, he seeks them for our morality. Kant was searching for nothing less than the fundamental moral law. But surely it was impossible to discover such a law that would please everyone. From Christians to Buddhists, from liberals to Prussians, all believing in the same fundamental good. Kant believed it was possible to discover a basic law, but he did so by sidestepping what most would consider to be the main question. Good and evil were not his concern here. He was not seeking to discover some essence of all the different interpretations of these basic moral concepts. Kant stressed that he was seeking the grounds of morality, rather than its content. As with pure reason, so with practical reason. What was needed was a set of a priori principles, like the categories. In fact, Kant eventually came up with only one principle, his categorical imperative. This was the a priori ground for all moral action, its metaphysical premise. In an analogous way to the categories of pure reason, this gives a framework to our ethical thinking, practical reason, though without giving it any specific moral content. Kant's categorical imperative states, "Act only in accord with a principle which you would at the same time will to be a universal law." This principle led Kant to believe that we should act in accordance with our duty, not according to our feelings, and resulted in some odd conclusions. For instance, Kant stated that the moral worth of an action should not be judged according to its consequences, but only insofar as it was